Hello, welcome to another episode of SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Korg Volca Bass. Previously we looked at the Beats. This is the second of the trilogy, the trio of little analog instruments that Korg has released, and it's just causing a storm everywhere. So we're very fortunate to have all three. Today, as I say, is the Volca Bass. Now this looks very much like the kind of silver livery of the 303. Even got little knob caps that are quite similar to that as well as the standard monotron style pots here we have too. Very much the same layout. Obviously we've got the power section here, 9 volts, center positive, doesn't come supplied. This is my own universal power supply I'm using on this. It comes with 6 AA batteries, as with all the other range. Then we've got across the top here, tempo, simple attack, decay release envelope, and cut-off envelope intensity. More connections, MIDI in, we can play this via an external MIDI keyboard, and sync in and out like the other ones. You can set the polarity and possibly use this to be triggered from a modular system, or maybe send some pulses to some other modules in the range. Apparently there are demos showing it working with the MS-20 Mini, but that would be just clock because it doesn't output CV or anything like that, just input MIDI, output sync. Across the main face here we've got octave, which sets the octave of the keyboard here, not the range of the oscillators. If you play via MIDI, you don't, this knob doesn't affect anything. Then we've got the peak or resonance, cut-off filter, LFO, individual pitches for the 3 oscillators, volume, and then various function and transport. So let's take a listen to the oscillator straight away, because you're going to want to know what those sound like, right? So right here we've got oscillator, single oscillator. Goes quite low, quite high, very sort of nice and sort of spiky sawtooth. We can change that to be a square. You can hear there's some portamento built in. If you trigger it, works in legato mode. You can actually switch that off if you've got MIDI control. Next big component is going to be the filter, and the filter is in fact modelled on the Korg 700S, which is a legendary affordable monosynth from Korg. Big fans of these are people like Daniel Miller, who did a lot of his early work on it, and also Goldfrapp use it as well, and I might be able to emulate one of those sounds later on. So let's take a listen. Sawtooth wave. Nice and smooth. Bring a bit of resonance in. Take it up high. Lots of low harmonics in there. Can really scream like a proverbial. So lots of character in the filter. We've also got an LFO. Goes right up high. Interestingly, the octave seems to affect the maximum rate of the LFO. I'm not sure why that is, but goes quite nice up into the audio rate. We can also change the LFO wave by hitting function and going into square. Not syncable or anything, just a free running LFO. There are 2 other modes to the oscillator as well, which is quite interesting because we're just listening to one oscillator at the moment. So if I go into the other mode, we've got 3 modes. If I hit function, I've got 3 individual oscillators here, or I've got 2 oscillators and 1 oscillator. These are for recording separate sequences, so you can effectively record 3 separate lines into the sequencer. You can't access the individual voices via MIDI, unfortunately, or we can have all 3 together, and that's where it starts to get really powerful. So I'll use that. And now if I plug my MIDI in, just because it's easier to play something meaningful, take the LFO down. Now what we've got here is the ability to tune the oscillators to either be bang on or detune by up to 100 cents, then it goes into semitones. We'll stick with pretty close to detune, so just maybe 10 or 12 cents. And then also we can go up or down an octave, so the third. So now I can play my line. So as you can hear, you might notice that was a line from Goldfrapp's Train, and they actually used the Korg 700S on that, so it does sound very familiar. You also will have heard there's some velocity going on, and that's great because this is also velocity sensitive. So looking at the MIDI implementation charts, we can affect the slide time, although that just seems to be on and off. It doesn't actually seem to get any lower, or just seems to be a preset time. Expression, effectively, we can affect the octave of the keyboard, LFO rate, LFO intensity, VCO pitch 1, 2 and 3, envelope generate attack, decay release, cutoff, envelope intensity and gate time of a note. These are fixed assignments, 5, 11 and 40 through 49. What you can't do is affect the individual level of each oscillator, which is a bit of a shame, so you can't get any balance. What you can do though is mute individual ones, switch them on or off using a function key, so that's quite useful. If I now take my sync lead from the Volca Beats, plug that in, so single oscillator, bring up some resonance, bring the envelope in. Now, it's not going to really kind of satisfy the 303 purists, but it's not bad emulation, and the sort of sequencing and step style gives you that kind of vibe for sure, and the waves definitely have that sort of character, if not the filter. The filter's obviously a 700S filter. But the thing where it gets really interesting in this mode is you can build up layers of sounds, because effectively you've got 3 oscillators here. I'll show you what I mean. So we'll start with oscillator 1. Going to 2. Into 3. Right away, got a little funky riff going, you know, I mean, you can go on this for endless, and that's the thing I found when I was doing the review. I'd start demonstrating this, and then I'd just go off and end up in this sort of 1-bar loop of just for hours, and then have to think, oh, I must film this. So yeah, really good fun. There are a couple of gotchas here. There's only one envelope. All these single oscillators all share the same envelope, the same filter, the same, so you get triggering issues sometimes, and if you're playing in via velocity, it seems to set the level of all the voices via the MIDI keyboard. They'll all drop to the last played velocity, so you can get a bit of, you know, you just got to get your technique right. The only other thing is It would be great if we could access the individual oscillators on individual MIDI channels. I mean, we've got individual sequencer channels. Why can't we have MIDI channels as well? Because that would make it really good fun and, you know, much more useful. You could, you know, obviously they will be sharing the same filter. There may indeed be some mods that means we could bring the oscillators out, but I'll leave that to people who are a bit more clever than me. While we're on the subject of the sequencer, we've got the same sort of features, active step recording, which means if I play this sequence here, I can go into active step mode and change the length of the sequence, but I can do this in multi-oscillator mode for each of the individual parts. So I've got these different sort of polyrhythms going against each other for all sorts of cleverness, and if I was any kind of programmer I could probably come up with something quite good. A couple of things to mention, in the Volca Beats there was motion recording, so you could record the tweaking of certain parameters into the sequencer. Not so in the Volca Bass, it's just purely notes, I'm afraid. There's a few other synthesis functions we should check out. If I press function here, I can switch on the amplitude envelope, and that means that when I play I've got a limited attack, decay, release envelope. I can also switch on the sustain portion, which means I get the release part after the sustain. Would have liked to have seen perhaps a longer decay release portion so we could have longer sustains, because I mean we're not always going to be playing this from the sequencer. I can also change the destination of the LFO. I've got cutoff, pitch and amplitude, and I can have them all on, or various configurations of each of those. If I go to LFO target pitch, bring the LFO in, you can also set the LFO wave to be square. So some other cool little modulation. I mean, surprisingly, you know, for the size of the unit and what's there, you can do quite a lot with it, really. You know, I found myself, like I said, just kind of getting lost a little bit in it when you consider how little there is to it. I think it's just the fact that the filter and the oscillators are analog, and there's a certain something that makes you kind of think, oh yeah, you just want to tweak it. So I must say, I'm pretty impressed with the Volca Bass. It's my favourite so far. When you consider the price, which is what, 120 quid, 139 euros, 149 bucks. What's that? That's the same price as perhaps taking your loved one out for a meal. So there's a tough choice to make there. I know which one I'd be tempted to do. Whether or not I'd get away with it is another matter.